Sarah Martinez had been waiting for this day for 22 years. She sat in the crowded auditorium of State University, her hands trembling slightly as she clutched the program. Today, her son Michael would walk across that stage and receive his degree in engineering. The single mother had worked 3 jobs for years to make this moment possible. The morning sun streamed through the tall windows of the graduation hall, casting long shadows across the rows of folding chairs. Sarah had arrived 2 hours early to get a good seat. She wanted to see every moment, every step Michael took across that stage. Her phone was ready to record, her tissues were in her purse, and her heart was full of pride. Michael had always been different from other kids. As a child, he spent hours building things with blocks, taking apart old radios, and asking endless questions about how everything worked. When other kids were playing video games, Michael was in the garage with his grandfather, learning to use tools and fix broken appliances. His curiosity about the world around him never seemed to fade. Growing up without a father had not been easy for either of them. Sarah's husband had left when Michael was only 3 years old, leaving behind nothing but empty promises and unpaid bills. She remembered the nights when Michael would ask where his daddy was, and she would struggle to find words that would not break his little heart. Those were the hardest times, when she questioned whether she was strong enough to raise a son alone. But Michael never seemed bitter about his father's absence. Instead, he threw himself into his studies and his projects. He joined the robotics club in middle school and spent weekends at science museums. When other teenagers were getting into trouble, Michael was at the library or working on scholarship applications. He knew his mother was sacrificing everything for his future, and he was determined not to let her down. The financial struggles were constant. Sarah worked as a waitress at a diner during the day, cleaned offices in the evening, and sometimes took on weekend catering jobs. There were months when she had to choose between paying the electric bill or buying Michael new school clothes. She always chose whatever Michael needed, even if it meant she went without. Her hands were rough from years of hard work, and her back ached from long hours on her feet, but she never complained in front of her son. Michael had earned a partial scholarship to the State University, but it was not enough to cover everything. Sarah took out loans, worked extra shifts, and sold her car to help pay for his education. She rode the bus to work for 2 years so Michael could have what he needed for college. When he tried to get a job to help with expenses, she insisted he focus on his studies instead. During his freshman year, Michael called home every night. He was homesick and worried about his mother working so hard. Sarah could hear the guilt in his voice, but she always reassured him that everything was fine. She told him she was proud of him and that his success would make all her sacrifices worth it. She never let him know about the nights when she fell asleep at the kitchen table, too exhausted to make it to her bedroom. As the years went by, Michael's phone calls became less frequent. He was busy with internships, study groups, and the normal activities of college life. Sarah understood this was natural, but she missed their long conversations. She followed his progress through his grades and the occasional photos he posted on social media. Every achievement he shared filled her with joy and reminded her why she had worked so hard. Now, sitting in the graduation auditorium, Sarah reflected on all the moments that had led to this day. She thought about the times she had to miss his school events because she was working. She remembered the Christmas when she could only afford one small gift for him, and how he had hugged her and said it was the best present ever. She thought about the acceptance letter that had arrived in the mail and how they had both cried tears of joy in their small kitchen. The crowd around her was filled with families celebrating their graduates. She saw fathers in expensive suits, mothers wearing designer dresses, and grandparents with cameras worth more than Sarah made in a month. For a moment, she felt out of place in her simple black dress from a discount store. But then she reminded herself that she belonged here just as much as anyone else. She had earned her place at this graduation through years of sacrifice and love. Sarah looked down at her arms and unconsciously pulled her sleeves down a little further. The tattoos on her forearms were carefully hidden beneath the long sleeves of her dress. She had gotten them during a difficult period in her life long before Michael was born. They were reminders of a time when she had made different choices, before she became the focused, determined mother she was today. She rarely thought about them anymore, but in formal settings like this, she was always conscious of keeping them covered. The tattoos told a story she did not often share. They were from her younger days, when she had been married to Michael's father and thought their life would follow a different path. One tattoo was a military insignia, representing her first husband's service. Another was a date that marked both the best and worst day of her life. She had kept them as reminders of where she had come from and how far she had traveled. As the ceremony was about to begin, Sarah noticed the families around her. She saw parents who had clearly never worried about money, children who had been given every advantage, and graduates who had never had to work while going to school. For just a moment, she felt the weight of all the struggles she and Michael had faced, but then she pushed those thoughts away. Today was not about comparing their journey to others. Today was about celebrating what they had accomplished together. The processional music began, and Sarah's heart started racing. She stood with the rest of the crowd as the graduates began filing into the auditorium. Each young person wore the traditional cap and gown, their faces glowing with achievement and anticipation. Sarah searched the crowd for Michael's familiar face, her eyes scanning each row as they passed. When she finally spotted him, her breath caught in her throat. There he was, her son, walking with confidence and dignity among his classmates. He had grown so tall, so handsome, so accomplished. The little boy who used to build towers with blocks had become a man with an engineering degree. She felt tears starting to form in her eyes, but they were tears of pure joy and pride. Michael was looking around the auditorium, clearly searching for her in the crowd. When their eyes met, he smiled the same bright smile she remembered from his childhood. He gave her a small wave, and she waved back, not caring who might be watching. This was their moment, the culmination of years of hard work and determination. As the graduates took their seats, Sarah settled back into her chair. The formal part of the ceremony was about to begin, with speeches from the dean and the valedictorian. She knew it would be at least an hour before Michael's name was called, but she did not mind waiting. She had been waiting for this moment for his entire life, and she wanted to savor every minute of it. The woman sitting next to her leaned over and whispered, "Which one is yours?" Sarah pointed proudly toward Michael and said, "The tall one in the third row, with the dark hair."
The woman smiled and said, "He looks just like you."
"You must be so proud." Sarah nodded, unable to trust her voice to respond without breaking. As the ceremony continued, Sarah's mind wandered to thoughts of the future. Michael had already accepted a job offer from a respected engineering firm. He would be moving to a city 3 hours away, starting his career and his independent adult life. She was thrilled for his success, but she knew she would miss him terribly. Their little apartment would feel very empty without his presence. She had not told Michael about her plans yet, but Sarah was thinking about going back to school herself. Now that he was graduated and employed, she could finally think about her own dreams. She had always been interested in nursing, and there was a community college program she could attend while working part-time. It would be her turn to build something for herself, to create a future that was about her own goals and aspirations. The dean was now speaking about the achievements of the graduating class. He talked about their academic excellence, their community service, and their bright futures. Sarah listened with pride, knowing that Michael had contributed to all of these accomplishments. He had volunteered at a local elementary school, tutoring children in math and science. He had participated in engineering competitions and won several awards. He had made the most of every opportunity his education had provided. As the ceremony progressed, Sarah noticed a man in military dress uniform sitting several rows ahead of her. He appeared to be alone, and she wondered if he was a graduate himself or if he was there to support someone else. There was something dignified about his bearing, the way he sat with perfect posture and paid careful attention to every word of the ceremony. His uniform suggested he held a high rank, though Sarah was not familiar enough with military insignia to know exactly what his position might be. The time for the individual degree presentations was approaching, and Sarah could feel her excitement building. She checked her phone to make sure it was ready to record, adjusted her position for the best view of the stage, and took a deep breath. This was the moment she had worked toward for 22 years, through countless sacrifices and challenges. When the engineering graduates were called to line up, Sarah watched Michael stand with his classmates. He straightened his cap, smoothed his gown, and joined the line that would take him across the stage. Sarah's heart was pounding so hard she was sure the people around her could hear it. She raised her phone, ready to capture the moment when her son's name would be called and his dream would officially come true. The line began moving toward the stage, and Sarah found herself holding her breath. Each name that was called brought them closer to hearing Michael Martinez. She thought about calling her own mother, who was too ill to attend but would want to know the moment it happened. She thought about Michael's grandfather, who had passed away 2 years earlier, but would have been so proud to see this day. As Michael approached the stage, Sarah stood up to get a better view. Other parents around her were doing the same thing, and soon half the auditorium was on their feet. The energy in the room was electric, filled with the joy and pride of families celebrating their graduates' achievements. The military officer she had noticed earlier also stood up, and Sarah caught a glimpse of his profile. There was something familiar about him, though she could not place where she might have seen him before. He seemed to be watching the ceremony with particular interest, as if he was looking for someone specific among the graduates. Michael was now third in line to cross the stage. Sarah's hands were shaking as she held her phone, and she realized she was crying without even being aware of it. The little boy who had once asked endless questions about how things worked was about to become a college graduate. The sacrifices, the long hours, the financial struggles, the worries, and the love had all led to this single, perfect moment. The graduate ahead of Michael crossed the stage and received his diploma. Then it was the next student's turn. Sarah's heart felt like it might burst from her chest as she watched her son step forward, ready to receive the recognition he had worked so hard to earn. This was it. This was the moment that would change everything for both of them. Michael Antonio Martinez, Bachelor of Science in Mechanical Engineering, summa cum laude. The words echoed through the auditorium like music to Sarah's ears. She watched through tears of joy as her son walked confidently across the stage, shook hands with the dean, and received his diploma. The moment seemed to last forever, and no time at all. She had captured it all on her phone, but more importantly, she had captured it in her heart. Michael paused at the center of the stage and looked directly at her in the audience. He raised his diploma slightly and smiled the same smile she remembered from his first day of school, his first science fair victory, and every proud moment in between. Sarah waved back, not caring that she was crying openly now. Other parents around her were wiping their eyes too, caught up in the shared emotion of the moment. As Michael left the stage, Sarah finally sat down, her legs suddenly feeling weak. The woman next to her handed her a tissue and said, "That was beautiful. You should be so proud." Sarah nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. She was proud, prouder than she had ever been of anything in her life. The ceremony continued with the remaining graduates, but Sarah found it hard to focus on anything except the overwhelming joy filling her chest. She kept replaying the moment in her mind, watching her son receive the diploma that represented years of sacrifice and determination. This was what they had worked for, what every long night and early morning had been about. When the last graduate had crossed the stage, the dean asked everyone to stand for the closing remarks. Sarah rose with the crowd, still clutching her phone with the precious video of Michael's moment. The graduating class was instructed to move their tassels from right to left, officially marking their transition from students to graduates. As hundreds of tassels moved in unison, the crowd erupted in cheers and applause. The ceremony concluded with the traditional throwing of caps into the air. Sarah watched as Michael and his classmates tossed their mortarboards high above their heads, their faces full of joy and relief. The auditorium filled with the sound of celebration as families rushed toward the stage area to find their graduates. Sarah made her way through the crowd, searching for Michael among the sea of black gowns. The auditorium had transformed from an orderly ceremony into a chaotic celebration. Families were hugging, cameras were flashing, and everyone was talking at once. She pushed through the crowd, her eyes scanning for her son's familiar figure. Finally, she spotted him near the side of the stage talking to some of his classmates. When he saw her approaching, his face lit up and he broke away from the group. They met in the middle of the crowd, and Michael swept his mother into a huge hug that lifted her feet off the ground. "We did it, Mom," he whispered in her ear. "We actually did it." "You did it," Sarah corrected him, though she knew the truth was that they had done it together. Every sacrifice she had made had been worth this single moment of pure happiness. They held each other for a long time, oblivious to the celebration continuing around them. When they finally separated, Michael kept his arm around his mother's shoulders. "I couldn't have done any of this without you," he said. "I know how hard you worked, how much you gave up. This diploma belongs to both of us." Sarah looked at her son, this accomplished young man who had grown from the curious little boy she had raised alone. "I'm so proud of you, Michael. Your grandfather would have been proud too. You've become everything I hoped you would be, and more." They were interrupted by Michael's friends, who wanted to take pictures and celebrate together. Sarah stepped back to give them space, content to watch her son enjoying this moment with his peers. She took more photos and videos, wanting to capture every detail of this perfect day. As the crowd in the auditorium began to thin out, Sarah noticed the military officer she had seen earlier making his way in their direction. He was tall and distinguished, with gray hair and kind eyes. His uniform was impeccable, and the insignia on his shoulders indicated he held a high rank. There was something purposeful about the way he was walking, as if he had a specific destination in mind. Sarah assumed he was looking for his own family member and turned her attention back to Michael, who was still celebrating with his friends. But she became aware that the officer had stopped walking and was standing nearby, seeming to observe their group. When she glanced in his direction again, she was surprised to see that he was looking directly at her. The officer approached slowly, his expression serious but not unfriendly. Sarah felt a flutter of nervousness, unsure why a high-ranking military officer would be interested in her or her son. Michael noticed the man approaching and stopped his conversation with his friends. "Excuse me," the officer said, his voice deep and respectful. "Are you Sarah Martinez?" Sarah's heart skipped a beat. How did this stranger know her name? She looked at Michael, who appeared equally confused. "Yes, I am," she replied cautiously. "Do we know each other?" The officer studied her face carefully for a moment. "I believe we may have met before, a long time ago. My name is Captain James Rodriguez, United States Marine Corps." He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "I was wondering if I could speak with you privately for a moment." "Is there a problem, sir?" he asked politely but firmly. Captain Rodriguez smiled at Michael's concern for his mother. "No problem at all. I just noticed something that brought back some memories, and I wanted to ask your mother about it." He looked at Sarah again. It would just take a minute. Sarah felt confused and slightly worried. She could not remember ever meeting a Marine Corps captain, and she had no idea what he might want to discuss with her. But something in his manner suggested this was important to him, and she found herself nodding. "Of course," she said. "Michael, why don't you go find your diploma cover? I'll be right here." Michael hesitated, clearly reluctant to leave his mother alone with a stranger, even one in uniform. But he saw something in her expression that told him this was something she needed to handle herself. "I'll be right over there," he said, pointing to a nearby area where some of his classmates were gathered. "Just call if you need me." When Michael had moved far enough away to give them privacy, Captain Rodriguez turned his full attention to Sarah. "Mrs. Martinez, I hope you don't mind me asking, but do you have any tattoos on your arms?" Sarah's breath caught in her throat. She looked down at her long sleeves, which completely covered her forearms. How could he possibly know about her tattoos? She had been so careful to keep them hidden, especially at formal events like this. "I'm sorry, but why are you asking me that?" The captain's expression softened. "Earlier, during the ceremony, I noticed you adjusting your sleeves. Just for a moment, I thought I caught a glimpse of something familiar. A tattoo that looked like it might be related to military service. Specifically, Marine Corps service." Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. She had been so careful, so conscious of keeping her sleeves in place. But during the emotional moments of Michael's graduation, she must have let her guard down. "I don't understand what you're asking me," she said quietly. Captain Rodriguez took a step closer, his voice gentle but persistent. "Mrs. Martinez, I think you might have a tattoo that includes the date April 15th, 2004, and possibly some Marine Corps insignia. Am I correct?" Sarah's legs suddenly felt weak. April 15th, 2004. She would never forget that date as long as she lived. It was tattooed on her left forearm, along with the eagle, globe, and anchor emblem of the United States Marine Corps. But how could this stranger possibly know about it? She looked around the auditorium, suddenly feeling exposed and vulnerable. The celebration was continuing around them, but her world had shifted dramatically in the space of a few seconds. "How do you know about that?" she whispered. The captain was quiet for a moment, and Sarah could see something deep and emotional in his eyes. When he spoke again, his voice was softer than before. "Because I was there that day, Mrs. Martinez. April 15th, 2004. Fallujah, Iraq. I was there when your husband died." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. She had to grab the back of a nearby chair to keep from falling. Michael's father. Staff Sergeant David Martinez, the man who had left when Michael was 3 years old, but not by choice. Not because he had abandoned them or stopped loving them. He had left because he had died serving his country in Iraq, and Sarah had never told Michael the truth. "You knew David?" she managed to say, her voice barely above a whisper. Captain Rodriguez nodded slowly. "I was Lieutenant Rodriguez then. I was there when the IED exploded. I was there when we lost 6 good Marines that day, including your husband. I was there when David talked about you and his little boy in those final moments. He made me promise to tell you that he loved you both more than life itself." Sarah felt the world spinning around her. She had spent years building a different story, telling Michael that his father had left them, letting her son believe that he had been abandoned. She had thought it would be easier than explaining the complexities of military service, death, and loss to a young child. But as the years passed, the lie had become harder and harder to maintain. The tattoos on her arms told the real story. The date of David's death, his military unit designation, and the Marine Corps emblem he had served so proudly. She had gotten them in the months after receiving the news of his death, when she was drowning in grief and struggling to raise Michael alone. They were her way of keeping David's memory alive, even as she told the world a different story about their relationship. "I tried to find you after the deployment," Captain Rodriguez continued. "I wanted to keep the promise I made to David, but when I went to the address the Marines had on file, you had moved. No forwarding address, no way to contact you. I've thought about you and your son many times over the years, wondering how you were doing, wishing I could have delivered David's message." Sarah was crying now, silent tears streaming down her face. "I moved because I couldn't handle the memories," she admitted. "Every knock on the door, every phone call, every piece of mail from the military brought it all back. I just wanted to start over somewhere new, somewhere David had never been." The captain reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, worn photograph. "David showed me this picture every day we served together. He carried it everywhere." He handed the photo to Sarah, and she gasped when she saw it. It was a picture of her and Michael from when he was 2 years old, sitting on a beach somewhere. She remembered David taking this photo during one of his leaves home. "He talked about you both constantly," the captain said. "About how much he missed you, about how he wanted to come home and teach Michael to play baseball, about how proud he was to have such a strong, beautiful wife. Even in that final moment, after the explosion, he was trying to tell me about you." Sarah held the photograph with shaking hands. "Why didn't you tell me before? Why wait until today?" Captain Rodriguez looked toward Michael, who was still with his friends but glancing over at them with concern. "Because I wasn't sure it was you. 22 years is a long time and people change. But when I saw you in the audience today, something about you looked familiar. And when I caught that glimpse of your tattoo, I knew. I knew you were David's Sarah, and that young man graduating today was David's little boy." The weight of all the years, all the lies, all the carefully constructed stories came crashing down on Sarah at once. She had spent more than 2 decades protecting Michael from the truth about his father, thinking she was making things easier for him. But now she realized that she had robbed him of the chance to know what kind of man his father really was. "He doesn't know," she whispered to Captain Rodriguez. "Michael doesn't know his father died in Iraq. He thinks David left us, abandoned us. I told him his father didn't want to be bothered with raising a child." The captain's expression showed no judgment, only understanding and compassion. "You were trying to protect him," he said gently. "You were a young mother, dealing with an impossible loss. You did what you thought was best at the time." Sarah looked across the auditorium at her son, who had just achieved one of the biggest accomplishments of his life. He was laughing with his friends, his face glowing with happiness and pride. How could she tell him now that everything he thought he knew about his father was a lie? How could she explain that she had hidden the truth from him for his entire life? "What do I do now?" she asked the captain, desperation clear in her voice. "How do I tell him the truth after all these years? How do I explain that his father was a hero who died serving his country? Not the man who walked out on us that I've let him believe in." Captain Rodriguez was quiet for a long moment, watching Michael interact with his classmates. "That young man just graduated summa cum laude with an engineering degree," he finally said. "He's clearly intelligent, thoughtful, and mature, He's also David's son, and David was one of the most honorable men I ever served with. I think you might be surprised by how well Michael handles the truth. Sarah knew the captain was right, but the thought of having this conversation terrified her. She had built their entire relationship on this fundamental lie, and she was afraid that the truth might change everything between them. What if Michael could never forgive her for keeping this secret? What if it destroyed the close bond they had always shared? "There's something else," Captain Rodriguez said quietly. "Something I think you and Michael should both know about David's service, about the man he was and about what he did the day he died. Would you be willing to sit down with me sometime soon and let me tell you both the whole story?" Sarah looked at the photo in her hands, at David's young face smiling back at her. She thought about the tattoos hidden beneath her sleeves, about the years of secrecy and careful lies. She thought about Michael, who had grown up without knowing anything about his father's courage and sacrifice. "Yes," she said finally. "Yes, I think it's time Michael knew the truth about his father." 3 days after graduation, Sarah sat in her small living room with Michael and Captain Rodriguez. The apartment that had been their home for 15 years suddenly felt different, filled with the weight of secrets about to be revealed. Sarah had asked the captain to come over so they could have this conversation in private, away from the distractions of the outside world. Michael had been curious about the meeting ever since his mother had told him about it. He knew something significant was happening, but he had no idea how dramatically his understanding of his own life was about to change. He sat on the couch next to his mother, occasionally glancing at the uniformed officer who had requested this meeting. Captain Rodriguez had brought a folder with him, thick with photographs, documents, and letters. Sarah could see David's name written on the tab, and her heart clenched at the sight of it. After all these years, here was proof that her husband had existed, had served, had mattered to people beyond just her and Michael. "Before we begin," Sarah said, her voice trembling slightly, "I need to tell you something, Michael, something I should have told you years ago." She took a deep breath, knowing that the next few minutes would change everything between them. "Your father didn't leave us the way I told you he did. He didn't abandon us or decide he didn't want to be part of our lives." Michael's brow furrowed in confusion. "What do you mean? You told me he left when I was 3 because he didn't want the responsibility of being a father." The pain in Sarah's chest was almost unbearable as she prepared to undo more than 20 years of carefully constructed lies. "Your father died, Michael. He died serving in Iraq when you were 3 years old. He was a Marine, and he was killed by a roadside bomb. While on patrol, he never left us by choice. He never stopped loving us." The color drained from Michael's face as he tried to process this information. He looked from his mother to Captain Rodriguez and back again. "What? That's not possible. You told me he was alive. You said he just didn't want to be bothered with us." Sarah reached for her son's hand, but he pulled away, confusion and hurt clear in his eyes. "I know what I told you, and I know it was wrong. I was young and scared and dealing with grief I didn't know how to handle. I thought it would be easier for you to think he had chosen to leave rather than to grow up knowing he had been taken from us." Captain Rodriguez cleared his throat gently. "Michael, if I may, your mother was trying to protect you from pain she didn't think a child should have to carry. What she told you wasn't right, but it came from a place of love." Michael stood up abruptly and began pacing the small room. "So my entire life has been built on a lie? Everything I thought I knew about where I came from, about why it was just Mom and me, about why I never had a father, all of it was made up?" The anger in his voice cut through Sarah like a knife. This was exactly what she had been afraid of for all these years. "Michael, please understand. I was 24 years old when your father died. I was pregnant with you, alone, and devastated. The military offered counseling and support, but I couldn't handle any of it. I just wanted to disappear and start over. But you let me grow up thinking my own father didn't want me," Michael said, his voice rising. "Do you have any idea what that felt like? Do you know how many nights I lay awake wondering what was wrong with me that made my own father leave?" Sarah started crying, the guilt and regret of 22 years pouring out of her. "I'm so sorry, Michael. I know I handled it wrong. I know I should have told you the truth from the beginning. But once I started with the story, I didn't know how to take it back. The years kept passing, and it got harder and harder to find the right time to tell you. Captain Rodriguez opened his folder and pulled out several photographs. Michael, would you be willing to sit down and let me tell you about your father? Let me show you who David Martinez really was. Michael hesitated, clearly still processing the revelation that everything he had believed about his origins was false. But after a moment, he sat back down, though he maintained some distance from his mother. Fine, he said quietly. Tell me about this father I never knew I had. The captain placed the first photograph on the coffee table. It showed a young man in marine dress uniform, tall and handsome with dark hair and serious eyes. This is your father, Staff Sergeant David Martinez, taken when he graduated from boot camp at Paris Island. He was 19 years old, about the same age you are now. Michael leaned forward to study the photograph. The resemblance was unmistakable. The same dark eyes, the same strong jawline, the same determined expression Michael had inherited. He looks like me, he said softly. The resemblance is remarkable, Captain Rodriguez agreed, but it goes beyond just physical appearance. From what I observed during our deployment together, you've inherited many of his character traits as well. He placed another photo on the table, this one showing David in combat gear with a group of other Marines. This was taken in Iraq about 2 months before he died. That's me on the left. He pointed to a younger version of himself. Your father was one of the most respected Marines in our unit. He was tough when he needed to be, but also incredibly kind and thoughtful. Sarah wiped her eyes and added, he was so excited when he found out I was pregnant with you. He spent hours reading baby books and planning all the things he wanted to teach you when he came home. He was going to build you a treehouse and teach you to play baseball. Michael's expression softened slightly as he absorbed this information. What kind of person was he? I mean, beyond just being a Marine? Captain Rodriguez smiled at the question. He was the kind of person who remembered everyone's birthday and made sure to call home even when we were in dangerous situations. He carried that photo of you and your mother everywhere, and he showed it to anyone who would look at it. He was incredibly proud of both of you. The captain pulled out a stack of letters. These are letters your father wrote to your mother during his deployment. He wrote one every single day, even when we were in combat zones. He wanted her to know he was thinking about her and looking forward to meeting his son. I never received those letters. The military must have sent them to our old address after I moved. They were returned to the unit as undeliverable, Captain Rodriguez explained. I kept them, hoping someday I would find you and could give them to you. He handed the bundle to Sarah. They belong to both of you now. Michael watched his mother's hands shake as she held the letters from his father. Some of his anger began to fade as he saw the depth of her emotion. Can I read one? He asked quietly. Sarah nodded and handed him the top letter from the stack. Michael opened it carefully and began to read aloud. My dearest Sarah, today marks 3 months since I left you and our baby. I know these months have been hard for you, being pregnant and alone. I think about you every day and dream about the moment I get to hold my child for the first time. His voice caught as he continued reading. I've been talking to the other guys with kids, getting advice about being a father. I want to be the best dad possible for our baby. I want to teach him about right and wrong, about working hard and treating people with respect.
So,
If it's a boy, I want to teach him to be strong but gentle. If it's a girl, I want her to know she can do anything she sets her mind to. Michael looked up from the letter, his eyes bright with unshed tears. He was excited about having me, he said, wonder clear in his voice. He was over the moon, Captain Rodriguez confirmed. He talked about you constantly. He had already picked out names both for a boy and a girl. He wanted to name a son Michael Antonio, after both of your grandfathers. That's my name, Michael whispered. You named me what he wanted. Sarah nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Captain Rodriguez continued. Your father was also incredibly brave. The day he died, April 15, 2004, our convoy was returning from a mission when an improvised explosive device detonated under the lead vehicle. Your father was in the second vehicle, but instead of staying in safety, he immediately got out to help the wounded Marines from the first truck. He paused, giving Michael time to process this information. That's when the second explosion happened. Your father was trying to carry a wounded Marine to safety when it went off. He saved 3 lives that day, but lost his own in the process. Michael sat in silence for several minutes, absorbing everything he had learned. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet but steady. So he was a hero. He was, the captain confirmed. He received the Bronze Star Medal for his actions that day. It's one of the military's highest honors for bravery in combat. And Sarah pulled up her sleeves, revealing the tattoos she had hidden for so long. The Marine Corps emblem was clearly visible on her right forearm, along with David's name and dates of service. On her left arm was the date, April 15, 2004, surrounded by other military symbols and imagery. I got these after I received word of his death, she explained to Michael. They were my way of keeping his memory alive, even when I wasn't ready to share that memory with you. Michael studied his mother's tattoos, seeing them as evidence of a grief and love he had never understood before. You've been carrying this secret all these years, he said slowly. You've been mourning him alone. I thought I was protecting you, Sarah said. I thought it would be easier for you to grow up thinking your father had chosen not to be part of your life rather than knowing he had been taken away from us. I was wrong. I see that now. Michael moved closer to his mother on the couch. Why tell me now? Why today, after all these years? Because Captain Rodriguez recognized me at your graduation, Sarah explained. He saw my tattoos and remembered your father talking about us. He's been looking for us for 20 years to keep a promise he made to your father. The captain reached into his folder one more time and pulled out a small wrapped package. This was your father's, he said, handing it to Michael. He asked me to make sure it got to his family if anything happened to him. Michael unwrapped the package carefully. Inside was a simple gold watch, worn but well-maintained. Engraved on the back were the words, "For my son, so he'll always know it's time to come home. Love, Dad." Michael stared at the watch, his composure finally breaking. Tears streamed down his face as he held this tangible connection to the father he had never known. He bought this for me? He bought it the week before he deployed. Captain Rodriguez said gently. He told me he wanted you to have something that showed you how much he loved you, something you could carry with you always. Sarah put her arm around her son, and this time he didn't pull away. They sat together, both crying, both mourning the father and husband they had lost, and both trying to process 22 years of separation from the truth. I'm sorry I lied to you, Sarah whispered. I'm sorry I robbed you of knowing what kind of man your father was. I'm sorry I let you think you weren't wanted when the truth was that you were the most wanted, most loved child in the world. Is it the 5th of September? I understand why you did it, he said. I don't agree with it, and it's going to take me time to process all of this, but I understand. You were trying to protect me from pain even though it caused different pain instead. They stayed like that for several minutes, holding each other and grieving together for the first time. Captain Rodriguez watched quietly, knowing that this moment was what David would have wanted most, for his wife and son to have each other and to know the truth about his love for them. There's one more thing, the captain said eventually. Your father's unit is having a reunion next month. It's the 20th anniversary of our deployment to Iraq. I would be honored to have both of you there as my guests. There are other Marines who knew David and would love to meet his family. Michael looked at his mother, then at the watch in his hands. I'd like that, he said. I'd like to meet the people who knew my father. Sarah nodded through her tears. I think I'm finally ready for that, too. As Captain Rodriguez prepared to leave, he shook hands with both of them. Your father would be incredibly proud of both of you, he told them. Sarah, you raised an exceptional young man under extremely difficult circumstances. Michael, you've achieved everything your father hoped you would, and more. After the captain left, Sarah and Michael sat together reading through David's letters. Each one revealed more about the man who had loved them both so deeply, who had dreamed of a future he would never get to see. Mom, Michael said as they finished the last letter, I want you to know something. Even though I wish you had told me the truth earlier, I understand why you made the choices you did. You were dealing with impossible circumstances, and you did the best you could. Thank you for saying that, Sarah replied. I know I can't change the past, but I promise you there will be no more secrets between us. From now on, we face everything together, with complete honesty. Michael looked at his father's watch, which he had put on his wrist. I have so many questions about him, about his family, about our family history. We'll find out everything we can, Sarah promised. We'll learn about your father together, and we'll make sure his memory is part of our lives going forward." As the evening grew late, Michael made one final observation. "You know what's strange? All these years I thought I was angry at my father for leaving us. But now I realize I was never angry at him at all. I was angry at the idea of abandonment. But my father never abandoned us. He loved us until the very last moment of his life." Sarah smiled through her tears. "He did love us, and now you know the truth about that love." Michael squeezed his mother's hand. "Thank you for finally telling me. Thank you for trusting me with the truth." Looking back, Sarah realized that this conversation should have happened years earlier, but she also understood that they had both needed to be ready for it. Michael's graduation had marked not just the end of his education, but the beginning of a new chapter in their relationship, one built on truth, understanding, and the shared love of a remarkable man who had given his life for his country and his family. The tattoos that Sarah had hidden for so long were now visible symbols of a love story that could finally be told in full. David Martinez had been a hero, a loving husband, and a devoted father, and his legacy lived on in the son who would carry his watch and his memory forward into the future.